Dear viewers, welcome to today's episode of Visite, and thank you for the numerous letters that reached me via Visite at QS24.tv. These were again letters from a wide variety of concerns, from medical advice from a holistic point of view, to how do you rate these laboratory findings. A very interesting, or many very interesting case documentations that ask for advice. But I picked out a letter for today's Visite show. And it is about a question. This is Johanna S. from Austria. Johanna is 28 years old and asked to explain what is the connection between chickenpox and shingles? And is there a risk of infection between adults and children? And if so, in which direction? Children to adults or adults to children? In the last few years, she looked at this topic and can't understand the meaning or the meaningfulness of immunisation against chickenpox in children. So let me talk to you today about this topic, because I'm a doctor too, and have not understood the decision that we should vaccinate children against chickenpox viruses from the first moment. Chickenpox is not a modern-day disease. Chickenpox was first observed and documented as early as 1767. And Steiner proved at the time that direct contact happens from person to person via the infected chickenpox blisters. And thus chickenpox was manifested as an infectious disease. Chickenpox and shingles are two diseases of the same origin. In any case, it is about herpes viruses. The incubation period of our children is from 11 to 14 days. Sometimes it can turn into 4 weeks. The incubation period means that you have become infected but are not yet sick. You don't know that maybe the day after tomorrow or next week or in 3 weeks you'll get chickenpox. However, whenever the papules appear, these are small skin protuberances in the form of blisters. When liquid emerges, when this so-called exanthema spreads over the body, then a contagiousness to others develops. That is why it is a very important illness for children, because in this phase, our children also break through developmental barriers. It is quite interesting to observe that children who are still small then start speaking, or that if they weren't anywhere near to be potty trained, they had always only diapers, now suddenly experienced a boost and no longer need the diaper. Wise parents know that a child's illness is important. We don't have to get everything out of the way of our children. We have to accompany them through difficult situations so that, and as in the case of chickenpox, they build up lifelong immunity. Nothing at all can do the same. Any disease with wild chickenpox virus is a lifelong immunity. And that's a big bonus we can give to children on their way into life. I was born in 1959, a generation who perhaps experienced a different childhood than today. But even my children were especially taken to kindergarten if there was a chickenpox case, in the hope, and not only in the hope, in the knowledge that now the children are all going through a phase together and are allowed to build up a lifelong immunity. And that, of course, has brought about herd immunity in 99.9% of all children, and above all, without complications. Hardly any childhood illness is as uncomplicated as chickenpox. Of course, it's not so easy for the children, and we must accompany them in the sense of it is only temporary, and we must soothe the itch, and we must take good care of them. But it's not dangerous at all. And it won't be dangerous either. There are exceptions. That is, if people are now heavily under chemotherapy or cortisone therapy and would now be infected with chickenpox due to their immune deficiency, then this can already lead to blood coagulation disorders or to real diseases of the mucous membranes. And in the first trimester of pregnancy, it is really not positive. So the body registers this danger and prepares the pregnant woman for abortion or miscarriage, sometimes for stillbirth. But these are absolute exceptions, and I believe that a young woman who is carrying the child under her heart now does not put herself in danger by being in contact with someone who has chickenpox. Because a sick person is only then contagious, which means that I can also influence it, and I can influence it even more. Just being in contact with a pregnant woman doesn't mean you've gotten chickenpox, but the pregnant woman must have a vitamin A deficiency. This constellation is just as important as transmission with polioviruses. In case of hypoglycemia, that means this vitamin A deficiency. And I wrote it down. Maybe take a look at this slide now with things that contain vitamin A. Which foods contain vitamin A? That is, if I'm pregnant and take in enough high-quality fats such as butter, such as eggs, fish, when I eat high-quality green, leafy vegetables, when I eat carrots, tomatoes, then the question of infection for a pregnant woman you can move one or two more slides further, is actually not possible in advance. That is, an infection naturally encounters another human being. But this organism must also be strong enough at the moment to weigh up such an infection. And it is very important that you know that this vitamin A is responsible for the embryonic development of the fetus. Vitamin A is involved in an incredible number of metabolic processes. We need vitamin A to regenerate our mucous membranes and for growth and differentiation, for the cells and for all tissues in our organism. Therefore, a very big appeal to a pregnant woman. The moment when she is pregnant, actually this situation can hardly have appeared in my youth, and also when my children were born before 1995, because real natural immunity was built up here. And so a pregnant woman also has an immunity that lasts until the end of her life. The problem is those who couldn't go through it. And if a child falls ill with chickenpox, of course we have to accompany them, and it is best to give the child a tablespoon of cod liver oil every day. It contains vitamin D and vitamin A. A diet containing fresh food, raw vegetables, salad, fruit, rich in vitamin C, of course, not Haribo chocolate or maybe wheat rolls. That's not good at all. And the more intensively the child deals with this illness, and fever in particular is of course also a major driver which incredibly activates the defence, overcomes the whole protective barrier. Actually, this process subsides again after days. Rus toxicodendron, which is a homeopathic remedy, can be used very nicely to relieve the itching in children. We used to put powder on it or sometimes zinc ointment. We don't like doing that anymore because it's a process of elimination via the blisters, and you don't smear it in the truest sense of the word. You actually try to calm this itching from the inside. (2L-Herp, a means of microimmunotherapy, an immune modulation, and now support the immune defence in dealing with these. Herpes viruses can also be a very good base in the accompaniment of a child with chickenpox. The journal Atherosclerosis published an interesting article in 2007, and there it described that every human being who had the chance to have a lifelong immunity against chickenpox is significantly less vulnerable to cardiovascular disease throughout their life. And a new study just completed in 2020 by Dr. Melissa Bondi, who has examined over 4,000 cases of glioblastoma, so brain tumour patients, and observed a significantly lower responsiveness by 21% of these people who, as part of their immune system, were also involved in dealing with chickenpox or herpes viruses and suffer less from these diseases. This is interesting because the whole question of also developing into tumour diseases for us today does not find or has not found answers so much in the direction of what viruses actually do. Viruses are intracellular, and the development of tumour diseases in other countries is already much, much more intensively embedded in the development of tumour diseases. Here in Central Europe, we are, of course, already talking about the papillomavirus. We also know in the case of lymphomas that the Epstein-Barr virus is essentially involved as a lymphotrophic virus. But I find this statement or this study extremely interesting. In Europe and in Germany, we introduced the chickenpox vaccination for our children in 1995. And the argument was parents don't really have to remain at home that long anymore with these children. I have to tell you, I find that an unbelievable argument. And nobody knew at the time how far the immunity actually extends. Are these children really protected for life in case of another contact? The second argument was anyone who gets immunised with a chickenpox vaccination today has less of a chance of developing shingles later. Those were the statements of the vaccine manufacturer. And we just talked about the importance of natural immunity. Shingles itself can, but never has to. Unfortunately, a healthy adult cannot get shingles. But when it comes to shingles at a later age, then that means that the spinal ganglia, these are the nerve cords that are thickened in the spinal cord, and that's where these nerve cords enter the spinal cord. And at the end of the spinal cord, they come out again and they then supply the organism. This means that you know exactly which segment of the spine leads to which nerve in the area of the thoracic spine, cervical spine and lumbar spine, which strand has let the chickenpox virus hibernate in dormancy for many, many years now. Let me put it that way. And these nerves are sensitive. Sensitive means they lie under the skin and they react to pressure, to cold, to irritation and to all external influences, make contact and then relay that information back to the brain. So back. And if there is a reactivation of the former chickenpox virus, then it only works if something has happened in this adult organism. So it's not possible by virtue of health. That means something must have happened now. It can be a very acute event. I remember a patient who came in with severe shingles on her face. And this shingles happened 6 weeks ago. Before those 6 weeks, I asked her about the relevant event, what had happened. And she said her cat was run over. Now that may not be a problem for some, but was a big one for her because she has looked after the cat for over 18 years and it was like a child for her. Nothing had happened there, but 3 days later she is sitting with her husband in a restaurant and he collapses in front of her, and briefly a second deep loss was on her mind. Someone she loves, her husband. The husband just collapsed due to poor circulation, but the second blow was enough for her. In order to completely delete the signal for immunity, in the context of this selectively acute stress. And now such a shingles develops. That means there could be other reasons as well. It can be a consuming disease that as a person you don't even notice that you weaken in your defences. And shingles also lets the doctor look behind the scenes. What is wrong? Those are completely different things. This can be an intense zinc deficiency, for example. We've talked about vitamin A before. They're all triggers. Also, of course, chemotherapy or radiation, tumour diseases, cortisone therapies, which massively weaken the immune system. And I also think one of the most important co-causes is when people don't make sure they have enough vitamin D. So every October, every March, you need to know that. Adults who have shingles can trigger chickenpox in children who are not immune, but not the other way around. So chickenpox children cannot easily transmit the viruses to an adult, or they cannot now develop shingles through the children just because children have chickenpox. And if we assume that the normal immunity is, of course, about 99% of people have been through it in their lives, then those are also very improbable things. But what we see is that the number of people suffering from chickenpox has fallen drastically. And I have never, in my 30 years, seen as many herpes zoster patients as now. This means that there is an upward trend, and also within the range of reduced immune defences, which we increasingly notice with our patients, this can be an important indication that we should really start therapeutically at an early age. If an adult has shingles, then I would like to stress again at this point, please, no aspirin. That can cause Ray's syndrome. This is severe hepatic encephalopathy. This means that an encephalitis develops. So please, no fever reduction and no anti-inflammatory therapy with aspirin. There is passive vaccination, there is active vaccination. There is the passive vaccination at the moment when a pregnant woman is acutely ill. Switzerland refuses to do this because the indication for the unborn baby of getting shingles is just too big. Therefore, as a pregnant woman, I should refrain from being near a chickenpox child if I'm not immune, or you can prove it serologically and make sure you have enough vitamin A, then the risk is significantly reduced. I just want to say one thing in closing. The acute vaccination of our children is really not necessary. In the USA today, there is no longer the possibility of simply going to kindergarten if the children are not vaccinated against chickenpox. I wish for common sense for all people in the future. And we today, as adults who still have been allowed to achieve this healthy and normal immunity, should by no means deprive our children of the opportunity to build up lifelong protection here. And we see this vaccination as a risk. In addition, we have been recommending vaccination against shingles for years. That's exactly the same. The vaccination has a maximum protection of 4 to 6, 7 years. And one must understand the causes that lead to shingles. And that is the lack of immunity. That's why shingles isn't either treated with an acliclovir, with an antiviral agent, but at that moment in immune modulation must take place with 2-L-Zona high-dose vitamin C. Anti-inflammatory factors such as vitamin E and omega-3, high doses of vitamin D and vitamin A and B vitamins. And then I have to tell you quite honestly that shingles is also a disease that can be treated very well, that brings people back and at the same time and leads the defence, the own immune system, out of a phase of weakness. With this in mind, I would like to thank you very much for your attention through the letters to Visite at QS24.tv, and I am really looking forward to the next episode with you. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.